Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Read TFOS, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Advanced Warning, written by Looney123. Representative Douglas snapped into the room after his colleagues, Representative Ling and Representative Dune. The other delegation was already waiting, one reading something on a communicator, and the other sharing a laugh over a joke unheard by the human delegation. The horror lead diplomat looked up from her communicator. "All right, you two, there's a job to do, and professionalism is expected," she chimed in, glancing at her fellow delegates, and then standing up to greet the human delegation. The other two horrors stopped laughing, but kept their smiles as they walked over to the human party. Douglas found himself paired with one of the jokers, and despite his earlier apprehension, the horror he was talking to exuded infectious eagerness.
"Hello, human. It is an absolute pleasure to meet you. I'll be straightforward. It seems that most of your kind likes that from what we've analyzed, but anyway, this is my first contact,"
he shot out, chuckling slightly.
"Oh, I'm not experienced. Forgive me,"
he blurted out as he held out his hand. Douglas couldn't help but smile as he reached out to complete the handshake. "Well, I guess that makes two of us. I suppose out of the six of us, only one or two have any first contacts under our belt. And that'll be your other delegates," he said with his own chuckle. The horror chuckled in response.
"Well, Thuva is the lead inductor, so this is far from her first negotiation. Mal Werso, this is his fourth induction. Obviously, 3 inductions aren't enough to teach you everything you need to know, but 3 is 3 more than none,"
he laughed out, as they chatted idly for a minute or two. Douglas couldn't help but like the rookie diplomat, despite his superior's warnings. "Mal Walser, Mal Narvan, humans, we should proceed now," called out the lead horror delegate. Douglas and Narvan walked over to the table in the center of the room. Douglas could see Ling and Walser had paired off, with Walser walking Ling back to the table, both smiling with Horror's arm around Ling's shoulders. "These guys are friendly," pondered Douglas. As the humans sat down, the horror they had talked to sat opposite them. "All right, I can see what they're trying to do. Make us like them, and then make us look right at the ones we've already built a weak bond with," Douglas analyzed. "To get started, and in the interest of time and open communication, we'll let you read the basic terms of induction over and answer any questions to our best ability as they come up," recited Thuva. Mal Walser reached into his bag, withdrawing a large tablet and handing it across to Ling, who handed it to Dune to read. "Thuva, if I may ask, what role will Mal Tharvan play in these negotiations? As I understand it, this would be his first induction," Douglas inquired during the silence.
"Mal Narvan is here simply to observe it as is. New members of the diplomatic service always go through one shadowing of induction to know the process better in the field," she explained amicably, Mal Narvan emphasizing the point by nodding to the best of his ability. Ling was reading off of the tablet as Dune interrupted the room's stillness with an occasional slow scroll of the device. Douglas simply read the delegation opposite him. Mal Narvan had started to tap his hand on his leg. Mal Warso's eyes lazily wandered around the room, and Hal Thuva stared at Dune, occasionally brushing her clothes or picking at her fingers. Either they're expecting an easy negotiation, or have lower standards of negotiations. "This will be interesting," thought Douglas. Dune finally set the tablet down in front of him, looking up with a blank face. All eyes were on him. "We were not aware, while planning this meeting, that the Horror were an empire. Furthermore, we were not aware that any negotiations that might take place would be upon conditions applied to the human race while in servitude to the Horror Empire. Due to these circumstances, we will cancel these negotiations. Our government will not accept any of these conditions and requirements on a practical and moral level. This induction is over." Dune laid out, face blank of all emotions. "Damn, I need to practice my poker face more," Douglas admired. There was plenty of emotion on the horror delegation faces. Thuva bore a look of disappointment mixed with the stern expression of a parent admonishing their child. Mal Walser looked angrier than Thuva, while Muan Narvan just looked confused, shifting his gaze between the two delegations. "I assure you, This is a perfectly fine agreement. I understand that you have qualms about the terms of induction. Every species does. That's why we're here to work them out. In fact, I'd say that you were extremely lucky that we came,
Thuva said. I believe that your analysis of our language is not exceedingly satisfactory to use the word luck in this situation, Ling stepped in. Humans have an extensive experience with slavery in the past, and it's now considered...
Now don't be hasty with your own analysis, Ling, Mao also cut in. The word slavery contains connotations and levels of meaning, and would be inappropriate to use in this situation. Besides, we revile slavery. As to the point with luck, there are various other empires in the galactic region that do not share our qualms with slavery, and you are lucky that we came before them.
Dune calmly picked up the tablet again and started summarizing points out loud. All humans must have their genetic information put in a database for identification purposes. Human government officials will be replaced by either horror officials or approved non-horror officials. The horror empire maintains the rights to any and all ores and natural resources. Human breeding must be approved by the Subject Planning and Relocation Agency. 750,000 humans are to be chosen by the Subject Planning and Relocation Agency to be relocated to where they are needed most in the Horror Empire. Otherwise, any human wanting to go to another planetary body must get approval from the Freedom of Travel and Commerce Agency. Dune carried on for another few minutes, clearly trying to make the connection to the horror between the excessively totalitarian terms and why you might consider it slavery. It didn't seem to work.
Yes, as I said before, you read the entire agreement out loud. That is a fairly standard agreement. I assure you, your situation would be best if you agreed now, of course. If your government has any qualms with the specifics, we would be happy to address them and perhaps reach a mutually beneficial conclusion to them, said Thuva, exasperated.
Dune, Ling, and Douglas simply stared at each other and turned as one to the horror delegation. Once again, we refuse these terms wholly. This negotiation is over. If you wish to start negotiations with the human race as equals, we would be more than happy, Dune flatly said.
I must insist, for your species' own safety, you will accept. Just accept, implored Thuva.
We refuse, reiterated Dune.
If that is your stance at the moment, I would like to refer that to my superiors. Please make yourselves at home while we discuss this,
Thuva said tartly, rising out of her chair and exiting the room. Mao also seemed to lose his anger, and Mao Narvan still looked confused as he watched Thuva walk out the room. Poor kid, this probably wasn't what he was expecting to learn today, lamented Douglas. A few minutes passed, and then another few. Dune and Douglas shared a look, the meaning clear. If she didn't return soon, the human delegation was leaving. After another few moments, the door opened and Thuva stepped back in, a slight spring in her step. She sat down, waiting a second, while staring at each of them in turn.
Your colony in what you call Light in 14323 is gone, she sang, bearing a slight smile.
Dune's eyebrows raised slightly.
You nuked our planet,
Ling yelled, standing up. Dune grabbed her arm, gently guiding her back down into her chair. Douglas simply stared at Thuva. He didn't register what she said. Sounds that he knew where words came out of her mouth, but they didn't seem to make sense.
Of course we didn't. We're not evil. A large nuclear weapon or weapons would ruin a planet. It would take centuries or millennia to clean it up. Radiation poisoning, fallout, all terrible, terrible things. We wouldn't stand for that. That's why we use mass drivers, explained Mao Warsaw. You need to relax, Diplomat Ling. In almost all cases, a mass driver is a quick end. But you also need to look at the bigger picture. There were at most 6 million people on that colony. That was your species' smallest, if I'm recalling correctly. There are several more in the vicinity that contain tens of millions. Shall we proceed? Inquired Thuva.
Douglas couldn't help but stare at Dune, and it appeared Ling couldn't either. With the power invested in the delegation by the government of humanity, I must again refuse these terms, Dune said solemnly, sighing. Thuva tapped a button on the communicator in front of her and waited a few seconds. The colony on Gliese 687 is now gone, Thuva simply stated. Douglas and Ling gawked at her, and Douglas noticed Mal Narvan was too. Well, we're all getting an education today. Douglas looked at Dune for a response. He had a ghost of a smile on his face.
Now, should we proceed? I believe the next colony is on Wolf 424, 35 million people, 36. I can admire the thinking of sacrificing a few to show bravery in the face of overwhelming odds. But these numbers significant. Letting them die to show your species' determination is redundant at this point. And that is small but not ignorable population of servitude to us. I strongly suggest that you accept the terms of induction, Diplomat Dune. Hal Thuver explained. Dune slowly looked at Ling and Douglas and stared daggers at Hu Thuver. In light of recent events, we will contact our superiors and come to a course of action. This should not take long. He dragged out his words, standing up with Ling and Douglas. They exited the negotiating room into their room. After the door closed, Dune took out his communicator. Commence, he spoke lowly. Ling and Douglas had large smiles plastered over their faces. Come on, you have to let one of us tell them. This will be the greatest diplomatic moment of our lives, Douglas begged. All right, but to be fair, you have to do rock, paper, scissors for the honor. Dune chuckled, a rare emotion from him to display. After a heated best-of-3 match, Douglas had won the privilege. They quickly put on their best Stonewall faces and marched back into the room. All three Horum had smiles on their faces, and Douglas could not wait to shatter them. Douglas cleared his throat, making them turn their eyes towards him. Upon contacting our government, we have received word that no casualties were had in either colony. Furthermore, due to the rights violations, attempted murder of 18 million people, and the attempted enslavement of the human race, the Horror Empire is now an enemy of humanity. Several minutes ago, we dropped retaliatory nuclear weapons and mass drivers on Horror military and administrative centers on several of the nearest Horror Empire systems, trying to minimize native population casualties, of course, Douglas said with a smile. Hu Thuver stared back blankly for a few seconds, then let out an enormous laugh, joined by Mal Warsaw and Mal Narvin. Never let it be said that humanity can't bluff like the best yo-yo players in the galaxy. She got out through her laughter. She cut her laughter down to a giggle when her communicator alerted her to a message. Her snickering stopped completely as she read. Mal Warsaw and Mal Narvin both stopped laughing as well, now casting nervous glances at her and the human delegation. You nuked us, Hal Thurvan whispered, still staring at the message, no doubt from somebody in her government. Mal Warsaw jumped out of his chair, shocked and rage evident on his face. You nuked us, he roared, at nobody in particular. Ling butted in ahead of Douglas. Only the military targets. We obviously don't want you using them, so naturally we want to keep you from repairing them and using them against us shortly. So, as you might say, we destroyed them and filled the area with terrible, terrible things. Just to be sure. Besides, they were fairly small nuclear weapons. Dune took command of the speech now. We knew exactly who you were and what you wanted before we entered this room. We knew over 30 years ago. We'd been communicating with the Larenta a few years before you inducted them by force. Lucky for us, they were just at the edge of where our radio signals became indistinguishable from background noise. Seems the Hawking Protocol restricted our bubble to the right size. All eyes were on him, although the horror eyes showed hatred for what they were looking at. They were no fools and no enemies of ours. They took the liberty of sending every piece of information they had on you to us. We've waited for this day for decades. The words dripped from his mouth. Can I take this part? Douglas interrupted. Dune nodded, smiling. I owe this man a drink. In addition to preparing ourselves, we have also been supplying and training Larunta rebels for years, but they patiently waited for today as well. Those nukes were the signals they fantasized about for decades. Humanity and the Larentan people are furthermore allied from this day, pledging military support to each other in times of need. Dune, Ling, and Douglas stood up as once. As of this moment, you and your ship's crews are prisoners of war, and your ship is being taken as we speak. You will be escorted to the nearest prisoner camp on Luton 143-23, Dune continued. It's a wonder how far drones and AI have come in terms of looking human. Thanks to the Larentai giving us advance warning, we evacuated all our colonies, converted them discreetly to prisoner camps, and populated them with less than biological occupants. He laid out to the shocked horror. Hopefully we can thank them in person soon. End of story. I would like to thank our T5 members and patrons, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Vidmori, 050, Dragzoon WRE,
and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.